Good morning and welcome to Easter Sunday at Cornerbrook Baptist Church. Today, as we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ, let me entitle my message to you, When Jesus Shows Up. Professional runner Rebecca Merla had a tweet go viral the latter part of March by performing a random act of kindness. She was walking near a grocery store when she was called to a car window where she saw an elderly man and woman in their car. The woman explained that she was afraid to go into the store for fear of encountering the COVID-19 virus. Rebecca agreed to take the grocery list and a $100 bill and pick up the groceries. In a short while, she brought the groceries back and the change, and she tweeted a little later about the fear within the community of elders who are disproportionately affected by the virus in her city. How many of these same seniors have no support system around them? Her tweet eventually reached 150,000 people. And it gives a very clear message. The need to be a neighbor within the guidelines for safety is critically important. And my message today is centered around the whole idea that meeting someone's need defines what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. It's the way in which we more closely resemble him. And in fact, it has a Resurrection Sunday connection on the very first day that Jesus rose. Luke chapter 24 has this story, and let me read a couple of portions of that chapter for you. Now the same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" Now, this story of the disciples on the road to Emmaus is a natural continuation of the Easter story. It happens on the same day as the resurrection of Jesus. And in fact, these two men may have been heading for the town of Emmaus within mere hours of the news that the tomb was empty. But there's an air of disbelief there. They're awash in doubt. The word of the women who'd been to the tomb was very likely discounted. They heard the pronouncement of his death. They probably stared in shock, having witnessed the execution of this miracle worker from Nazareth. In any case, they probably were among those who stood at the site of the cross as Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus took down his body and hastily laid him in a tomb. The events of the past few days had not fully settled in their minds. Their body language indicated that they had lost something. Now allow me to describe these disciples according to what they had and what they lost. They had a love for Jesus. He was their friend. They had a belief in Jesus. Their conversation was all about him on that occasion. And when Jesus joined them on the journey, they were talking about the one who now was walking with them, but unrecognized. Their memory was vivid. Their loyalty to him does not need to be questioned. They'd seen the beaten man who stood in Pilate's judgment hall to receive a sentence of death. They had seen the spectacle of his walk down the Via Dolorosa to the place of execution. They could probably remember the inscription that had been written above his head, and maybe they'd even heard the words that came from the cross. They obviously had enjoyed his ministry. They honored his memory. When they described him, they called him a prophet mighty in word and deed. They had a good enough grasp of what had happened to repeat their observations back to Jesus, who was unrecognized. That Jesus is hidden from them is evident. And they expressed amazement that this stranger who journeyed with them had no understanding of what had taken place in Jerusalem. Now, if these disciples had loyalty, they had love, and a good set of beliefs, what had they lost? Well, they lost their hope. You see, faith stabilizes our hope, and hope is a divine gift that sets our beliefs on fire. They reached a point where they no longer had faith that Jesus could do what he set out to do. Yes, they believed in him. Yes, they loved him. Yes, they certainly honored his memory, but the telling part of their conversation is in this statement. We had hope that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. Their language is all written in a past tense, and the meaning is this: he tried and he failed. He meant well, and we all appreciate that he tried, but the flame is gone out. While there was joy, now there are only tears. We love him still, but setting up a kingdom, doubtful. We have good words for him, but we've lost our hope. The great reformer Martin Luther once spent 3 days in a black depression over something that had gone wrong in his life. On the third day, his wife came downstairs dressed in mourning clothes. Luther said, "Who's dead?" "God," she replied. And Luther rebuked her, saying, "What do you mean God is dead? God cannot die." "Well," she replied, "the way you've been acting, I was sure he had died." This is where I find many people today, both inside and outside the church. In a sense, we are all on the Emmaus Road. I find loyalty to Jesus. I find love for Jesus and good beliefs about Jesus. But amidst that, there's a lack of confidence that he'll do as he promised. I believe that he's walking along with us, but in many cases, he's still unrecognized. Too many people act like he's dead. Many don't think it's necessary to pray to him, but I wouldn't pray to a dead God either. There are times when our eyes fail to apprehend his presence, and like those disciples, we can walk downcast towards home, our dreams crushed. We've walked a long way from the day when we believed that the gospel could overcome any barrier and reach any lost person. We have to be careful that we don't lose our passion in this time. We have to be careful that we don't walk this way dejected, existing on the memory of what we once believed could actually happen. Claire Booth Luce once wrote, "There are no hopeless situations. There are only people who have grown hopeless about them." Well, how's your hope index on this Easter Sunday in 2020 amid such a depressing world scene? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much optimism do you have? What's your enthusiasm quotient like? How much fervor do you still retain? And please understand that Jesus is a stranger to these disciples. Cleopas and his companions are prevented from easy recognition. Yet Jesus' words have a sharp tone to them. They may have been taken aback a little when Jesus said these words to them: "How foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" You can trust Jesus to walk along by your side, but at times he'll find it necessary to bring a bit of a loving rebuke. And he does this out of his care for us. He's too gracious to leave us in a downcast state. He joins himself to these dejected disciples, even as he joins himself to us today. He longs to fill us with living hope, with something that still makes our hearts burn. Some years ago, when Elvis Presley died, People all over the United States and the world were shocked at the passing of the person they called the King. Following his death, and we know this to be true, a number of young men who idolized Elvis Presley sought to imitate him. One young man, you can find many things about him, whose name is Dennis Wise, actually had his face surgically lifted and his hair contoured so that he looked exactly like his idol. He learned to play the guitar and made a few bucks appearing as a Presley lookalike. Spawned an industry, Elvis impersonators, growth industry if you live in Las Vegas. When he was interviewed by one of the newspapers about his passion to be like Elvis, this is what he said. "Yes, sir. Probably has an accent. Sounds like him too. I can't do that. Presley has been an idol of mine ever since I was 5 years old. I have every record he ever made twice over. I have pictures in the thousands. I have books, magazines, and pillows. I even have a couple of books in German and Japanese about him. I even have tree leaves from the front of his house. It was embarrassing to me when I was in school, for the kids were always teasing me. When Elvis was wearing white boots, I went out and bought white boots. Teachers would send me to the principal's office because I would refuse to button up my top 2 buttons on my shirt. And as soon as no one was looking, I'd button them right up again." But here's what's so telling about the interview. I never got to meet Elvis Presley. I saw him on stage 4 times. Once I tried to run up to the stage, and once I stood on the wall of Graceland, the Presley mansion, and tried to see him. For 12 hours, I stood there trying to get a glimpse of him, but he had so many people around him, I could never get close. These words describe sheer idolatry, the longing to be intimate with some great person, and it's essentially the worship of celebrity. But the tragic element in the story of Dennis Wise are those words I said. I could never get close to him. Here's the amazing truth. Jesus Christ allows us to get close. In fact, he is the one who has sought us. He initiated the search to find us in the same manner as he approaches these broken disciples on the Emmaus Road. He's not content to be a memory. Jesus doesn't want us teary-eyed victims of despair. He would rather we were filled with passion and fervor. He wants us to have resurrection life, and he's the only one who can give it. Look for a moment at Jesus' method here. Inside the knowledge that these disciples possessed was the spark to rekindle the flame that had died. Their hearts did not burn while they talked to him and poured out their complaints. Their hearts did not burn while they talked about what they knew, because facts alone cannot create passion for Christ. Their hearts burned when he talked to them. He showed up and everything changed. It was the content of his message that opened their understanding and set their hearts ablaze. And what did Jesus use, I wonder? Not some new theology, not some radical fad philosophy. When they were silent and listened to his voice, their hearts began to respond. Here's the way it's said in verse 32. Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road? What did Jesus say on this rather short trip of about 7 miles or 11 kilometers? There are times when I've longed to learn the content of Jesus' message to them while they were on this dusty trek. All I know, and what we are told, is that he began with Moses and continued through the Old Testament prophets, and that when they were finished, they were at their destination. Perhaps, and here I can only speculate, he took them to Psalm 22. Just listen to this, verses 16 to 18. The psalmist 1,000 years before said, "Dogs have surrounded me, a band of evil men has encircled me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. People stare and gloat over me." Hear this. "They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing." And from the psalmist, Cleopas and his friend would have seen Roman soldiers gambling for his robe. And little by little, the fire began to blaze in their hearts, and their tears again could become tears of joy. What Jesus did was stirred their hope afresh. I think he may have recited Isaiah 53 just a little. "We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." Isaiah says he was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. They would have seen him suffer and die all over again, but this time there would be context and there would be meaning. The fires of understanding would have begun to burn in their hearts. And that, folks, is what Jesus always does for us. He tears open the shutters that blind us to the light of God's grace. He silences us with the truth until our hearts begin to burn and thrill with the fresh discoveries of what we may have neglected. Perhaps the greatest beauty of this passage is that he does this when two despondent disciples are dragging themselves home in defeat. He went all the way to their home, broke bread with them, and refilled their lives with hope. Now, when this story ends, they're filled with hope. It propelled them, in fact, after they stopped for the night, it propelled them all the way back to Jerusalem with the greatest of all news. And it's not just an intellectual discovery. It's a lesson that tells us when hope burns low, we have to listen for his voice. He speaks the familiar but neglected truths, yet we have to be willing to walk along beside him. I can only imagine how the disciples burst into the room where the 11 were huddled and proclaimed, "Believe the women. We've seen him on the Emmaus Road. He showed up. He's alive." Our hearts were on fire. And right there and then, while they were giving this report, Jesus appeared. You see, when he's believed, when he's announced, when hope is alive and our hearts are on fire, Jesus is there. Now today, as we gather in a unique manner and in a unique time, we need to be reminded of something as well. In Corner Brook today, among those who are despondent and those who are broken, Jesus is showing up. I can assure you he's showing up in Italy, where there are so many who have died. He's showing up in Spain. He's showing up in China. He's showing up in the nation of Iran. And the nations of the world are welcoming his arrival and his presence. Wherever you go in these countries today, Christians are sharing the good news of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. In fact, they are welcoming Jesus Christ in the world today in such numbers that we have trouble charting the onward march of those who have become Christians. I bless God today for these moments when Jesus shows up. He shatters our doubt and fear and rekindles the fires of hope. So many people today need Jesus Christ to show up in a personal way in their lives. That elderly couple I told you about at the beginning, they waited 45 minutes in their car with a grocery note and $100 for what they described as just the right person to show up and help them. That person was Rebecca Mara. The couple didn't lack the means, but they simply had too much to lose. You see, today in a fearful, broken, and socially distanced COVID-19 world, there's a multitude of needs. And we can be the answer to someone's prayerful desire that God send just the right person along. If you have a need today, I can pray that it will be met, but I believe God will prepare someone's heart to meet it. And if you have the means today, then you or I can become the answer to meeting the needs of another person. Pathway to eternal life so often begins with meeting a temporal need. That, my friends, is the legacy of the Emmaus Road. And that's at the core of the disciples walking a disconsolate road 7 miles to Emmaus, starting their journey in despair and ending it in joy. May that kind of experience be what defines Easter for you in 2020. God bless you. Father, thank you that you can turn our sorrow into joy. You can turn our despair into hope. And I pray that in hearts who are open to you today, that lives will be changed because there will be a new trust, a brand new expression of faith in a God who is there, God who has given himself that we might be set free to find liberty in him and to know him as our God. We bless you and thank you. In Christ's name, amen.